Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us here today for this IPA webinar on legal aid for consumer protection. My name is Paul Adams. I'm the Director for Financial Inclusion Program here at Innovations for Poverty Action. I'll just be introducing the session today and moderating this report and the presentation, which is a project from part of our Consumer Protection Research Initiative. I'll give you some background on the initiative. It's a 5-year multi-country research initiative intended to diagnose, solve, and identify consumer protection risks in markets, especially in digital financial markets. We're coming to the end of the first 5 years of the initiative. So it's very exciting, and we're starting to see lots more sort of research results coming through and coming through pretty thick and fast. So watch this space for more webinars in the future. Today's webinar presents the results from one of the 20 or so research studies we funded, and it's a project looking at the impact of providing legal assistance to consumers who are in dispute with their financial services provider. It's one of the first projects I heard about when I joined IPA. So I'm really excited to have Matthieu and Silver here to share their results. My role is relatively simple. I'm going to introduce the speakers, then I'm going to hand it over to them, and then I'll moderate a Q&A at the end. So there's plenty of time for you all to ask questions, and I would encourage you to post those questions and comments in the Q&A box that you'll see as one of the options at the bottom of the webinar. We'll be able to answer some of those as we go along. For others, we'll have a discussion at the end. Just to note that we'll post the recording of the webinar and the slides after the event. So no need to worry about that. It'll all be available to you afterwards. Now, let me introduce the speakers today. First, we're going to hear from Anthony Kamwesigye, who's going to set the scene for consumer protection issues in Uganda. Anthony is a research manager at IPA, and he's interested in transforming research into policy through high-quality research design and results. He's been managing research studies in the field since 2009, and he's worked on several projects in the Consumer Protection Research Initiative. So after we see from Anthony, we'll hear from Silver Kayondo regarding the specific intervention that we're hearing about today and that was tested as part of this research. Silver is a Ugandan and South African trained lawyer, and he's currently heading the technology and digital economy practice at Autos Advocates in Kampala. He's also the founder of the Center for Technology Dispute Resolution Uganda, which is handily shortened to CTDRU, a public policy think tank focused on legal and regulatory models for fintech, e-commerce, consumer protection, artificial intelligence, and the fourth industrial revolution in East Africa. And then finally, we'll hear the results from Professor Matthieu Chemin. Matthieu is an associate professor of economics at McGill University and founder of ELIMU. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, Matthieu, but it's the Evaluation Impact Unit, which conducts work to measure the impact of poverty alleviation measures in Kenya. Matthieu's current research explores the nexus between the role of law and economic development. So why is it that some countries have better legal institutions than others? And do legal institutions causally affect economic development and poverty? To address these questions, and that's what we're going to hear about partly today, Matthieu works with judiciaries and law practitioners in developing countries to evaluate the impact of various legal initiatives with primary data collected in the field or from large data sets. Now, that's definitely enough speaking from me. I'm very excited to hear from all the presenters today. And first off, I'm going to hand over to Anthony to give us the background on financial consumer protection issues in Uganda. Over to you.
Thank you, Paul. And I'm going to, first of all, share my screen. Yeah, I hope everyone can see my screen. I'm going to be talk about the IPA briefly, the Consumer Protection Research Initiative, introduce the team, talk briefly about the consumer protection research that we have in Uganda, and then hand it over to Silver and Professor Matthieu for the consumer protection study, which is the Lawyers for Consumer Protection. The initiative was started in 2019. Now we are 5 years old, I should say, and this has been funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation with a goal of supporting researchers, regulators, and private sector in identifying the emerging consumer protection risks and regulatory testing solutions to mitigate these risks. To date, we have over 20 studies that have happened across 9 countries. We're going to share the slides like Paul has said, where you'll be able to see the full list of funded projects and also learn more about the IPA Consumer Protection Initiative. Talking about consumer protection and the risks therein, we realize that there are quite a number of risks, but which can be categorized into fraud and phishing, lack of transparency and product information, lending and debt distress, and also limited complaints handling and redress procedures. So our research evolves around these potential risks and these risk areas, and we shall most of this time be talking about complaints, redress, of course, which is through complaints handling. Since this is the team headed by Paul Adams, the director, the moderator for this session, for this webinar, and the country office for Uganda is headed by Patrick Nalere, the country director office, Ugandan office, and which is combined with Rwanda, something that happened in 2020. And this is the office that I personally belong to. Now, speaking about consumer protection research in Uganda, quite a number of studies have happened since the introduction of the Consumer Protection Research Initiative. We have quite a number from Transaction Cost Index, which we call monitoring the real cost of domestic payments. We have studies in the area of fraud prevention for consumer education. We've had collaborations with multiple regulators, UCC, where we analyze complaints data, Bank of Uganda, where we look at also complaints data handling. And for today, we shall, like I said, we're going to talk more about the Lawyers for Consumer Protection, and I'm going to speak about one of the studies therein. So Uganda Digital Finance Survey, the DFS survey. So this study is one of the biggest milestones that we had, where we unearthed the different consumer protection issues that we had. And this happened in the COVID times in 2020, towards the end of July. We looked at mobile phone subscribers in Uganda who were active towards the end of July. And this was a phone survey through a random day with a sample size of round 830 and round 762 conducted in the months of August and September. And like any other research, we had to make sure that the participants of this research are aware that they are participating in a survey intended to collect data and inform policies. Now, from this survey, quite a number of issues were asked, and you will notice from this that there are so many reports. The biggest percentage of complaints that were reported were related to phishing on phone, by SMS, and also, other challenges to do with agent overcharging, poor quality customer care, unexpected and unclear charges, complaints that are not being addressed. And 78% of the respondents report experiencing at least one challenge, which is a really, really high percentage. Now, if you look at the customers who experienced significant challenges, that was overcharging, and then you realize that there is no action that was taken from those customers. They didn't take any action, having experienced overcharging. Even those who sent money incorrectly, there was nothing that they could do, which is a big challenge. Maybe it's because they don't believe that in case they report, there's nothing that can be done. Those who reported, you see they use agents as the main point of contact. They run to agents. If you see the proportion from this, you see the proportion of consumers who go to their providers compared to those who contact directly their agents. It is a big share of consumers who go to the agents. But the biggest challenge here we have is that we do not have any action being taken. Now, those who registered complaints, researchers were interested in knowing which channels were these consumers using. And from this, you realize that most of these channels, of these complaints were logged through phone calls, SMSs, USSD, and followed by, and then others went through in person. The in-person one taking a big chunk. Now, what happens? Most of these consumers reported that there was nothing done. There was no solution provided. No solution provided after lodging a complaint. This is a big challenge because, with this, it creates a situation whereby the trust between the MNO and the regulators, because these complaints are either brought to the attention of the MNO or the regulator, the trust between the consumer and the regulator diminishes. Because if a consumer reports a complaint and it is not acted on, then there is diminished trust, which creates an issue of reduced usage of the MNO, stoppage of using an MNO, or changing from one MNO to another. But of course, the other biggest challenge that we have with changing is because the market is the same. What the challenge that you face in this direction, you end up finding it in the other with the other MNO. So now, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to find ways of, how can we do better? What interventions can be put in place to make sure that whenever such complaints come through are handled, all these issues are well addressed, and we have a built trust between the MNOs and the consumers plus the regulators. And at this point, this is whereby we come in with a study like Lawyers for Consumer Protection, whereby we shall hear from Silver Kayondo and Matthieu on how this can contribute to this solution that we are trying to reach at in a way of improving the consumer experience in the MNO and the DFS industry in Uganda. At this point, I will hand over to Silver to take on and speak about this collaboration. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, I'm just going to get full screen. I hope that's much better. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Anthony. So literally, really, that's the problem we're solving, is that we avail a team that would receive consumer complaints via our call center, social media, website, and walk-ins. And once you get that complaint, of course, you execute a consent form with the consumer and the investigation starts. Once we realize that they have a complaint, so we would not take on issues arising out of negligence. For instance, where a consumer sent money to a wrong number, we would not go with that if it involved consumer confidence. So typically we're dealing with issues like fraud by agents, fraud by scammers, phishing, and all that types of calls. So the first line of recourse is we would call the MNO, here is the mobile network operator or the service provider, and tell them about the complaint. And if they did not comply, then we would write the first letter and tell them, look, we called you about this client issue you've not resolved, please go ahead and resolve it. And if they did not respond to the formal, then we would write a formal complaint and escalate it to the regulator. In the Ugandan case, this being the Uganda Communications Commission and the Bank of Uganda, which is the central bank. So typically those would be the layers of the intervention that we provided. This graph shows the case type analysis from blocked SIM cards to unsuccessful subscriptions and then airtime deductions and all those types of things. We could see that the largest here were the airtime deductions, where customers would have their funds deducted through unexplainable means. The current traction is there. The resolution was at 37.1% at the time of data, and then about 24.6% were closed as non-actionable, and then others forwarded to the MNO. These are the typical case summaries. Consumer A reported that through a mobile money agent, they sent about $130 to the mother for medical assistance, but the mother never received the funds. He was advised to report to the police, and it resulted into them being asked for bribe of that amount to have their issue resolved. The other customer B is trying to obtain a loan of about $6, which was not successful. However, when he made a deposit of funds to his account, the loan was deducted to settle an unsuccessful loan application. Consumer C was a student, also lost her phone, leading to loss of her mobile money account. When she went to reactivate the SIM card, then the money was missing on her account. So you can see that the sums involved are really small, and this cannot be handled in the actual court process because the cost of recovery would be more than the amount you're claiming. So most people usually give up at that stage. Equally, they cannot go to what in Uganda we call the small claims court that usually entertains matters that are less than 10 million shillings because the evidential burden is high because of fraud and things like that. They can also not go to arbitration because fraud cannot be arbitrated. So that was the major challenge that we have. In terms of the major challenges we faced, of course, some clients had incomplete transactional data records. There was the limit scope. This study mostly focused on Kampala, and the problem is countrywide. And then we had regulatory gaps because Uganda does not have general consumer protection and the credit law. And then poor follow-up by clients due to small sizes of funds and the lack of cooperation from the service providers themselves. They did not want to be accountable to the citizens. And then the novelty of the idea to the regulators, thus making initial work difficult. They always wanted to know in which capacity is the center coming to us. You're not privy to the contract that the MNO or the service provider had with the client. And then we had limited infrastructure. For instance, it would have been good if we had like a bus serving as a mobile court and then transport. If a person is claiming $10, they can't invest $20 transport to come to you. It would have been good if we're going to them directly, which we tried to do in some scenarios. This is a picture of a sample mobile court of Abu Dhabi that entertains a bit of these grassroots issues. In terms of recommendation, we recommend maybe creating a consumer protection ombud and having legal reforms and policy briefs periodically using part of this research that we've got. The third one is something I'm really passionate about. If we could create consumer protection booths and kiosks to act as legal aid clinics in all these major hotspots that were identified in informal trading centers, in informal markets and taxi parks. And of course, advocacy for consumer protection laws and all this. Post-research, there are developments that have come up. For instance, Uganda now has a Competition Act to regulate antitrust issues. The money lending regulator has also established digital lending guidelines to capture guidelines for online money lenders. And then the banks have adopted an ESG framework, which we think maybe the social and the governance aspects will point them to consumer protection issues. There was also on Twitter, on X, an illegal online lending exhibition. This mostly captured Chinese applications that were not fully registered in Uganda, but were taking. This is how the exhibition looked like and some of the exhibited apps. So Ugandans took to Twitter to share stories about the poor lending practices, but also the poor recovery mechanisms involving breach of data that were subjected to this. In terms of proposed future interventions, I think the first one would be very useful. If we build a consumer protection app to collect more complaints and data at scale, then we could also do a study research on disappearing internet bundles, and then maybe sponsoring a consumer class action lawsuit to counter consumer abuse rather, and then the reduction of the research papers into policy briefs, as I had suggested. These are board members and all that. Thank you so much. I look forward to questions. Matthieu, over to you.
Yes, I'll take over. Thank you, Silver. So first I want to thank IPA for financially supporting this project. It would not have been possible without IPA. Thank you to Rafe Mazer, who contacted me for this project and connected me with Silver, who did tremendous work in Uganda. Thank you to Anthony at IPA for managing all this project. So let me show you the results of this study. I mean, it's been very well introduced, so maybe I should go fast on this, but essentially, there's a lot of evidence that mobile money, could be the next financial revolution. That's what people are saying, because it allows people to send and receive money more easily. And therefore, it allows people to engage in more risk sharing, meaning when you have a negative shock happening to you, you can use your mobile money to get money from your social networks. You can access loans, which is important for business. Mobile money can reach millions of previously unbanked people. But there's also a but. There's also issues with mobile money. As Anthony talked about very well, in this survey by Rafe and Matthieu Bird, they discovered that many users had big challenges, with mobile money. Money is sent but not received, utility bills are not paid, and there's very poor quality customer care centers, which makes it very difficult for people to resolve their challenge. A very small proportion of people resolve their challenge. So they find in their study that those with a challenge have lower trust and lower usage. So the idea for this intervention is to say, okay, so if we address these challenges, will there be a causal effect on more trust in the system and therefore greater usage? And therefore, if we go back to the slide before, more risk sharing and more access to loans, that's our entire causal chain that we have in mind. If we were somehow addressing the challenges of people, will this lead causally to more trust, more usage, and therefore more risk sharing and more loans, the traditional positive economic effects associated with mobile money? That's our interest in this project, and my interest is maybe a bit more general than that. My interest in this project is about the more general question of the impact of access to legal institutions on economic developments, because there's this whole theory that institutions matter and therefore legal institutions matter, but we don't have a lot of causal evidence, that they really matter. And we have also limited understanding of the precise mechanisms through which better access to legal institution would lead to economic development. Why would it lead to better economic development? In this project, we focus on one particular case, the case of mobile money, to understand the mechanism through which better access to legal institution could lead to greater economic development. Here is a preview of the findings. We do a randomized experiment. We work with CTDRU, the initiative led by Silver, with their innovative legal strategy that Silver just described. And a preview of the findings, we find more cases resolved in the treatment group compared to the control group by 23% more, And therefore, in line with our theory, more trust for the treatment group in the system, in the mobile money system, more usage of the mobile money system, and therefore more risk sharing and more access to credits. Okay, this is a very rosy picture, very positive picture, but I'm not hiding that we also face many obstacles, which I'm hoping I have time to get to today and share with you. But let me show you first the sample. Who did we work with? I think it's very important to explain exactly who did we work with. Did we work with the rich, the poor, you know? Did we let people contact us or did we contact people? That's kind of important to know. So we tried to have, before I go there, we tried to have a representative sample of Kampala, you know? We tried to have, we worked with those people with an unresolved mobile money dispute, which is a lot, you know, because Anthony just showed you some slides that most of the people have an unresolved mobile money dispute. So this is not a very strong criteria, you know, many people have that. We worked in Kampala. We drew randomly a list of villages, you know, it's called like that in Kampala. And importantly, we didn't go to the most educated villages or the wealthiest villages. We randomly drew and we made sure to go to villages that had high education or low education, high informal business ownership or low informal business ownership, you know, such that we have a representative sample of Kampala. We worked with first, whenever we went to a village, the IPA field workers went to village health team leaders or chairman local council to announce themselves, and such that these local leaders that know very well the community were able to refer us to people that they knew that had a mobile money issue. And then to those people, we knock on their door, we talk to them, and we do a screening questionnaire whereby we ask them, did you have a mobile money dispute in the last 90 days? So that it's fresh on people's minds. Is it eligible, you know, your mobile money dispute for our purposes? Do you have already a lawyer? You know, because we didn't want to displace any pre-existing lawyers, but nobody has a lawyer. So that was not a very strong criteria. And are you interested in receiving free legal aid in this project? You know, to the people answering yes to all that, they became eligible for our survey. So essentially, if you had a mobile money dispute, means mobile money dispute in the last 90 days, no, you were not included. And if you said yes, you were included in our baseline survey, which happened in 2022. Then we randomize, half go in the treatment group, helped by the legal strategy. The rest is control, business as usual. The treatment receives the intervention, and we do an end-line survey, essentially a year later in 2023. This is what people do with their mobile money. 92% of the sample send money to friends and family. 94% use it to receive money. 87% of respondents use it to buy airtime. 51% use it to save or keep money, and so on and so on. Okay. Now, the particular setting of Uganda is that it's essentially a duopoly. There's two mobile network operators, MNOs, mobile network operators. There's only two of them, MTN and Airtel. 31% used MTN in the last 90 days, 54% use Airtel, and 15% a combination of both, you know, but there's only two mobile network operators and two big actors, you know. It's important to remember because it may affect the incentives to take care of consumers when there's such a duopoly. Here are the challenges faced by people. The number one challenge is could not figure out how to reach customer care when I needed it. So there's an issue with customer care, you know. Then there's also unexpected or unclear charges and fees, agents charge extra, blocked accounts. And look at that, there's another one of customer care, poor quality of customer care, 32. Such that when you add up the red, you know, 42 and 32, you understand that customer care is the big issue, you know, and that's important for our intervention because the first thing of the intervention was to persist, encourage people to persist with customer care. We randomized, half of the cases were forwarded to CTDRU, and the cases in the treatment group are very well balanced with the cases in the control group. They're very similar. The people in the treatment or control group are very similar in with respect to trust in mobile money, the type of disputes, the financial amounts of the disputes, demographics are very well balanced, risk sharing credit is also very well balanced between treatment and control. I don't have time to show that, but you know, it's very good balance. The intervention, I'm going to go very fast on that because Silver already explained. So let me just skip on my slides and maybe just give you the last one, the legal strategy, to summarize what CTTRU did, which was whenever they received a case, they first call the mobile network operator and try to resolve it, you know, on a phone call. If that doesn't work, they move on to step number 2. Step number 2 is to write an official letter, you know, official looking letter with the lawyer's signature, you know, to a MNO with information about the case and all previous attempts made. If that doesn't work, step number 3 is to escalate to a final warning letter, you know, explaining the facts, and threatening to escalate to the regulators or to litigate. And then if that doesn't work, step number 4 is to escalate to the regulators. The 2 regulators in Uganda are the Uganda Commissions Commission, UCC, and the Bank of Uganda, BOU. For example, during the framework of this project, we were very happy to see at some point that the BOU passed there was some new regulations called the National Payment System Consumer Protection Act in 2022 during our project, you know, which introduced a new dispute resolution mechanism whereby people file a complaint and then BOU can ask the mobile network operators to resolve the case in 24 hours, you know? So when we saw that, we got very excited because we thought that this would be the answer to all of our cases. So let me show you the results of what happened, you know, the difference between the treatment group and control group in terms of the resolution of the case, which was our first outcome. Here are the results. In terms of dispute resolution, yes or no, was your dispute resolved after 1 year? Remember the time frame between our baseline and endline is 1 year, 2022 to 2023. Was your case resolved by the end of it? Here are the results between the control and the treatment group. The control is on the left and the treatment is on the right. So of course, on this graph, you can see an increase in the proportion of dispute being resolved in the treatment group. And this is statistically significant, you know, when you use a regression model to test a difference, you find a statistically significant difference between treatment and control. So this is already a first great result, right? That the legal strategy works. CTDRU works, you know, the initiative designed by Silver has a positive effect on dispute resolution. This is already a first result that is important to remember. But maybe the first question that comes to you when you see this graph is, well, why isn't it 100%, right, in the treatment group? Maybe you would have expected bigger results than this, you know? So, you know, there were some roadblocks. I'm not hiding that there were some roadblocks in this paper. This bar is not reaching 100%. What were those roadblocks? The first roadblock was with the MNOs, and Silver already talked about it. You know, the mobile network operators were not always very cooperative with us. Here is a quote from a private interview that I had with a lawyer in one of those MNOs. The lawyer told us, in 99.99999, you know, he said many 99999% of the cases, the system works. System works, there's no problem, you know. The rest of the time, it's customer's fault. That's what the lawyer told us in those MNOs, you know, and it's only a private quote. It's not scientific, you know, it's only a private quote from a lawyer in one of these MNOs, but I think it's indicative of a particular spirit, you know, in these MNOs that it's customer's fault, you know, it's not our fault. And actually, it was very difficult to cooperate with them. CTTRU tried to have memorandum of understanding, MOUs, with these MNOs to develop a working relationship and address these cases faster. And one MNO refused even to sign the MOU. Then The second roadblock that was faced was with the regulators. Remember, UCC, Uganda Commission, and Uganda Communication Commission and BOU that set up new regulation to address cases in 24 hours. Yes, but whenever CTDRU sent them some cases, they were not addressed by the regulators. We never received an answer from them, you know. And actually, one regulator even refused to meet with me for a private interview. You know, I wanted to talk to them, and they said, no, we're not interested. Just read the laws, you know. Again, indicative of not a very collaborative relationship. And then the other roadblocks was the courts. Very difficult to access the courts. CTDRU tried to file a case in the small claims court, you know, which is courts specifically designed for small claims, just like Silver explained. They answered, no, your case is not eligible because small claims courts are only for cases between individuals, not with the company. Yes, but that's not true. Actually, when you read the laws, it is possible for an individual to file a case against a company. But they said no. They said you have to go to a high court. And in the high court, they said, no, your case is too small. You have to go to the small claims court. So it was kind of very hard, you know, we met a lot of roadblocks, you know. So concluding on this project, you know, very good results, but not 100%. And I think it's because of these roadblocks, you know. This is essentially what I wanted to talk about. I was discouraged to show the regression results, you know, but let me just go very fast on them, you know, because we find a positive effect of the treatment on dispute resolved, on satisfaction with the resolution, on usage and trust. You know, you don't have to understand these results, but it's just a simple comparison of the treatment and control group that shows that, you know, in the treatment group, there's more dispute resolved and therefore more use and more trust of the system, which is exactly what we had in mind when we started this project. Robustness checks, you know, when you add controls, doesn't do anything. If you control for attrition, doesn't change much. We find some evidence of some positive spillovers because it's essentially an information intervention, right? The most important part of the intervention was to tell people to persist going to the customer care to ask them questions, you know. That's an information that can travel, you know, to the control group. And we find actually that there are some positive spillovers in the control group, such that we kind of underestimate the results when we compare the treatment and control group, because also the control group benefits. Heterogeneous effects. Is there a different effect for rich people or poor people? Does this legal strategy work better for the rich? No, not true. We find an effect for everybody in our sample. Everybody benefits, rich or poor. Then, are there different effects for different types of disputes, you know? Yes, we find evidence of different effects for different types of disputes. For example, we focus first on disputes where only the MNO is at fault. Okay, so for example, money, you send money and it's not received. You know, that's the fault of the MNO. In those cases, we found a positive effect, you know. Much harder to find an effect with fraud cases. Fraud are when, you know, an individual is committing a fraud by stealing people's money, you know. This is much harder because now it becomes a criminal issue where you have to file a case with the police. It involves way more actors than just the MNO, you know, the police, which has to find the fraudster, you know. So in those cases, we find less effects. Then we focus on cases where the money is missing, you know, and money is missing again is a difficult case to tackle. Why? Because it's very hard to find evidence, you know. Somebody says, oh, money is missing on my accounts. Okay, yes, but what's the evidence? You have to produce some evidence, you know, that money is missing. We cannot just rely on what you're saying. It's tough, you know, to address such cases. So in fact, the cases where we find a bigger effect were the simple cases where only the MNO is at fault. Then another heterogeneous effects. Are there different effects for big disputes or small disputes? No, we don't find evidence of that. The intervention is useful for kind of all cases. And then the final thing is that then we look at the economic effects, because remember, we have a treatment where people resolve their cases, they have more trust in the system, and they use more mobile money. So here we have a setting where the treatment group is using mobile money more than the control group. Therefore, we can test the economic effects usually associated with mobile money. Usually people say that with mobile money, there will be more risk sharing, because whenever you receive a negative shock, you can receive remittances from your friends through mobile money. This is what we find in this study when we look at risk sharing, you know. We collect data on negative shocks, on household consumption, and we find that when people in the treatment group receive negative shocks, their consumption does not decrease, you know, which is evidence of risk sharing. Then we look at access to credit. We also find positive effects there in the sense that the treatment group get more loans from mobile money. They trust more the system. They use more the system, right? So one positive aspect is that they get more loans, get more credits, which is very important because most households in our sample have a small business. And then most people say that the biggest obstacle to operate their business is shortage of capital. You know, so of course, better access to credit is going to have positive economic effects. Cost-benefit analysis, I'm going to skip that to leave it to the discussion if you want to talk about this. And let me just conclude. The conclusion is that, you know, a robust legal framework is needed to protect consumers such that the positive economic effects of mobile money can be fully realized. You know, we find that when there is better access to legal institutions, then this resolves mobile money disputes, this increases trust and usage, and this unleashes the positive economic effects of mobile money risk sharing and access to credit. Cost benefit, well, I haven't talked so much about that, but I can talk about it whenever I have questions. So I'll stop here. Thank you so much again to IPA, which financially supported this entire project. Thank you so much to IPA. Thank you to all the people who collaborated. Rafe at IPA, who first connected me with everybody. Silver at CTDRU. Anthony, that did all the, you know, difficult work. IPA Uganda.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Matthieu, and thank you to all our speakers, Anthony and Silver as well. Astonishingly, despite the very exciting results and presentation, there are there's just one question in the Q&A. I'd encourage everyone, if you want to drop your questions into the Q&A or raise your hand and we can just come to you live. Whilst we sort of gather a few up, let me take advantage of my role as moderator and just ask a quick question of Matthieu here. And you mentioned the spillover effects, which I found exciting and kind of intriguing. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing there and how you think we might be able to leverage that, right, for designing future dispute resolution policy or support?
Yeah, so for the positive spillovers, what we did in our analysis is that we used the GPS coordinates of people in our sample because we collected the GPS coordinates. And then what we do is that we look at the control group, and we're able with the control group to calculate the number of treated people living very close by to the individuals in the control group. So our hypothesis is that, you know, with more people living nearby that have been treated, you know, you're gonna learn more about what they did, what they went through with their mobile money disputes. And I mean, it's only speculation at this point because I don't know the exact mechanism, you know, but my speculation is that they hear about those cases that are being resolved and they hear about the number one advice that was given from this legal strategy was to persist going to customer care and never drop the ball, you know, because we had so many cases in this, the many cases resolved in this study were cases where people kept going with the right information, you know, because CTDRU was helping people know exactly the type of information that they had to go to these customer care centers. And so I think that message can go through very easily, you know, to the control group. And my speculation is that that's how it worked, you know. And this is something that everybody can do. You don't need a lawyer to go to the customer care. You just need to be encouraged. People are discouraged from going to the customer care center that treat them poorly, you know, where it's difficult to know what they're doing in there. And so if you have a previous discussion where CTDRU helps people understand the process and what documents they need, that can help a lot, you know. And I think this is something that can easily convey to the control group.
Great, thanks, Matthieu. One more question from me, and then I'll ask the question from Ashish and Willie. And this one for Silver this time. What role, like I see here, you have regulators, the UCC and the BOU, and you have the courts. What role is there for a financial ombudsman in Uganda? Does that role exist, or should it exist, given some of the difficulties you've had with those two organizations, with those two structures at the moment?
Maybe.
Yeah, you see, we do not have a financial ombudsman here, and that's the challenge, because government is actually in the process of rationalizing such entities. They are not creating any more entities because of the high administrative costs associated with that. And of course, you want it to be as independent as possible. So it would also be problematic to have the regulated entities contributing to setting up the ombudsman, because it would lose its independence. So now that's the thing, is that, so that's the vacuum through which I think citizen-led initiatives like CTDRU can cure. But also, yeah, I think Ashish asks an interesting question. I'd love to answer it if you think it's worth it.
Please go ahead. Good timing.
Yeah, so Ashish, in Uganda, the demerger between MNOs and digital financial services happened in 2021. So we've used the terms interchangeably because most people are familiar with the telcos, as opposed to the spin-off companies that became the digital financial services. That law, the National Payment Systems Act that Prof. Chemin talked about, is what mandated the telcos to spin off the financial services business. And so that meant that the Bank of Uganda and the Uganda Communications Commission executed an MNO, because the Uganda Communications Commission still regulates spectrum and internet, over which some of these digital financial services run. So to that extent, it's sort of a dual mandate. I hope that satisfactorily answers your question.
Great. And we also have a question from William Blackman, who wants to know more about the cost-benefit analysis. So that's probably for Matthieu. And of course, we know that lawyers can be expensive. In this case, this is, you know, a sort of free service to customers. So how can we make this kind of approach scale in a cost-effective way? Yes. Or does the solution lie elsewhere?
So let me show my slide then on the cost-benefit analysis. So yes, Willie, the project is not, we find that it is not cost beneficial with the current resolution rates. Meaning when you look at these numbers, you know, the resolution rate compared to, in the treatment group versus the control group, and you compare it to the cost, of providing this intervention, it is not cost beneficial at the current rates. But
Matthieu?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I can't see your screen, and I know one other participant can't, so maybe we try again.
I guess so. Is it working?
No, strangely, not from me anyway. Oh, there you go. This is good.
Yeah, okay. So what I was explaining is that when you look at these figures and you compare them to the cost of the intervention, it is not cost beneficial in the current setting. But we do some simulations where we estimate, if other stakeholders had been more cooperative, we estimate that the project would have been cost beneficial. Meaning if we hadn't met all these roadblocks, the MNOs refusing to sign and to use the MOUs, the regulators not respecting their own regulations, because one regulator had this new regulation that all mobile money disputes must be resolved in 24 hours, but that's not what happened. If that had been true, the project would have been cost beneficial. If courts had accepted our cases, the project would have been cost beneficial, under some reasonable assumptions. If there had not been these roadblocks, it would have been cost beneficial. So my conclusion from all this is that significant progress on the enforcement of existing regulation must be made to better protect consumers, such that the positive economic effects of mobile money can be fully realized, Another thing I wanted to say on the cost-benefit analysis is that we can make other suggestions to further drive down costs, because already we try to drive down costs in this project by working with law students, not lawyers. This intervention is led by law students, because those cases are simple. They do not require to go to courts, what a lawyer can do, we didn't go to court, so this approach can be done by law students, which drives down costs. And we offer another suggestion. Maybe there could be a tiered approach, where cases could be separated into very simple ones and more complex ones. The very simple ones are cases where we just tell people to persist in customer care centers, and that can be done by even less qualified staff than law students. You don't need a law student to tell people to persist at customer care centers. And then maybe the more complex cases that do not get resolved with this approach could be filtered down to law students, So my overall conclusion from all this is that if the stakeholders would cooperate, and if we were implementing this tiered approach, maybe there would be a scalable version of the project.
Great, thanks. Lots to do to get there, but we can hold out hope for that scalable solution.
Yes.
We have a question from Joel, which is initially directed at Matthieu, but I think there's something probably Silver could answer, which is whether the sort of legal, essentially whether consumers are ignorant of the existing legal framework, and that's perhaps what's holding back some of the resolution rates. Matthieu, Silver, I don't know which one of you wants to pick this up.
Matthieu, should I take that one, or you want to do?
Go, Silver.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say certainly lack of consumer awareness is one of the reasons, but it's not the only reason. I think it's a combination of factors. True, if you measure the literacy rates, a lot of problems were seen in informal communities rather than formal, well-regulated communities, because many of the educated people will go to Twitter or social media and call out these brands, and then they'll have a quicker resolution. But also we have to know that most of these regulatory offices are only based in Kampala. their country operations are very rich because about 65% of Uganda's GDP is only in Kampala, Wakiso, and Mukono, which are the regions that form around, that nucleus. And then, of course, the terms and conditions, true, are very complex for these products once you're signing up. And most people are just eager to get and start consuming the service the next day. And lastly, because the sums involved are really, really small, even lawyers have not looked at this area yet, unless you're going to do a consumer app that aggregates all these claims, and then you're threatened the telcos or the service providers with a class action lawsuit. I think that's the easiest way to move into that. So it's a combination of factors. It's not true that the consumer is always at fault, because even our internet is patchy. Even our payment system sometimes gets clogged. And even all these electricity bills, generally, even food ordered online, you can order a meal now and have it the next day. That's not consumer ignorance, It's just a systemic failure. Thank you.
Thanks, Silver. I think we've got time for one last question, and it's a good one because it's pointing the way forward for what comes next. So Matthieu Chemin, sorry, Matthieu, you're going to hate me for mispronouncing your surname. He asked, what's the next steps for the paper? So we've seen these initial results. When would we expect to see a published paper that we can share?
Published? I don't know.
A working paper, then, let's say something working that paper. We can point to.
That I have more control. I was very soon. Thank you, Matthieu, for your nice words. And I just want to present a bit more, get more feedback like today, get more questions to help me think through the best way to write the paper. And very soon I'll have a working paper version.
I think watch this space. And certainly IPA is very keen when we do get working papers that are published. We'll make sure that we publicize them on LinkedIn and Twitter and everywhere else that you can think of. I know there are a couple of other questions in the chat. Unfortunately, we don't have time to get to them. All that's remaining is for me to thank our speakers, Anthony, Silver, and Matthieu. Super exciting results. Let's hope that we can keep pushing forward on consumer protection issues in Uganda, and maybe we can push towards that scalable solution. Thanks again, everyone, and thanks everyone for joining. Enjoy the rest of your day, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.